like to welcome everyone on the panel today. We really appreciate it. And we're going to start. Casey, I'll start with you. You're the first one I see in the box. I want to just find out, like, what's a typical day like? I know in news there is no such thing as a typical day. It all depends on what's happening. But if you do have a routine, kind of talk a little bit about that.
Well, thanks, and thanks for having all of us. And I very much look forward to the discussion. You know, you're right. There is never kind of a usual day, but at the Times Union, it's usually, you know, wake up, survey the headlines. Mike Goodwin, who I think many of you may know, who's our city editor and is really kind of the spark plug to getting the newsroom's day started. You know, by the time we have our 9:30 morning meeting, he's spoken to a lot of news side reporters to find out what they've got coming up. We have an elaborate sort of digital / print, you know, Airtable budget that we're constantly updating and consulting. At 9:30, we'll get together. That meeting, and when I say get together, of course, it's on Slack. And we'll discuss the metrics for how we did the previous day. We care very much about our daily visits and whether we are hitting goal to achieve sort of our targets for the month and of course for the year. So we'll look at everything from how we're doing on social media to how we're doing with subscribers versus prospects versus, you know, non-prospects. And then we'll look over sort of what's about to pop over the course of the day, as much as we know it, as much as we've got it planned. We'll talk with the photo editor about where his folks will be deployed. And then it's kind of off to the races. The next time we will convene as a group is at a 2 o'clock Zoom session, which is much more devoted to the print product. And that's the meeting where we'll take a look at, you know, the photos that are in to that point in the day and get a sense of other photos that might be coming up. And we'll plot out what the front page 1A is hopefully going to look like, and what the Capital Region front is going to look like, what the centerpiece images will be. And usually that's broken down between the sort of gradations of the importance of stories based on position on the front page, which is sort of the way that, you know, newspaper people kind of think of the hierarchy of what makes big news. Is there is the strip story that is meant to be kind of the kind of hammering news lead. Then there is the lead story that is generally considered to be the most important. That is the one with the biggest headline. And then the down page stories, which usually they can still be very newsy, but obviously in the mix, you want something that's a little bit different. Over the course of the past month, I think it's fair to say that the Times Union has had wire copy on the front more than we ever have in a 1 month period at any point over probably the last 5 years or so, just because the news, so much of it has been from Ukraine. And that's been unique. And I think we probably had more wire centerpiece photos over the course of the last month than we have in quite a while as well. So the 2 o'clock meeting, everything is planned out, and then everybody sort of goes to their individual silos and does the editing. It's a very collaborative process. Will you take a look at that story? I've sent that one over to the print system, that type of thing, and that's really it. And then, of course, our layout staff is working well into the night. The sports department comes on in the afternoon. They have their entire sort of separate news cycle, but that's kind of the common day.
Good. Giuliana.
Well, I actually see a lot of similarities between a day at News 10 and a day for Casey at the Times Union. Mainly the portion of it that we have that initial morning meeting, and then we have that afternoon check-in meeting, and they're roughly around the same time. Something that has changed since I've been at 10, which has greatly impacted the way my day goes and the workflow and the timing of things, is that we start a little bit later, and that way we can have, you know, more of a live presence in the later shows. And what that means is that you do have less of a head start than you might want when you're setting things up, setting up interviews. You think of a lot of people getting into the office at 8:30, 9 o'clock, and then it feels like you're just a little bit behind the ball when it comes to setting things up and making calls. So typically what I'll do is I'll start a little bit earlier, start making calls, going through emails. And then I won't really know exactly what I'm doing until the conclusion of that 9:45 meeting, which can sometimes be until 10:15. It depends on how many things, we have to talk about. And then, of course, there's the news gathering portion of the day, which is I try to wrap it up by 2:30, ideally, with that 4 o'clock. It just comes so fast, but it doesn't always happen. You'll get the occasional, I'm actually not available till 3 o'clock. And it's like, wow, okay, well, we're gonna have to make it work. But typically, and then I've gotten more comfortable and more firm with telling people, exactly when they'll have to be available in order for it to be the story to be the best that it can be. But it is that super quick day turn, that really small window of time is typically what I'm operating on. And, having things set up the day before is always, it feels good, but then something happens and then I'm told to just throw the whole thing away because I have to totally pivot. So that can be, a challenge as well. But I would say, if I had to just sum up what a typical day is like, it's like hurry up and wait, or wait and hurry up. And that 4 o'clock just comes so quickly. But we've all pretty much adjusted to that. It's just, the story that you want to happen that day, it might not happen because of the window, and you might have to hold it till the next day, even if it's not as timely or whatever. That's just how the TV stuff works, unfortunately.
I think you bring up a good point of what you're saying. You're being firm and you're more honest now of if it's not going to work. It has to be that way on both sides. As communications professionals, we have to be upfront and say what we can do and can't do to give you the wherewithal to maybe move on or look for someone else. So I think that's a very important point, and knowing your deadline is also very helpful to us as well. Lynsey, how does your day look?
So a typical day for me starts at 3:30 in the morning. From there, I go into the station. We have a quick meeting to kind of assess where our producers and directors and the anchors that came in before me, where we're at right now in the shows, because we get started right at 4:30. We have 2.5 hours on CBS, and then we switch over to the CW at 7 o'clock. So for me, when I get in at 4, from there, I am reading the emails that came out for our morning plan to start writing my stories to hopefully be ready to go live at 5. Sometimes it happens, sometimes it doesn't, depends how much coffee and how awake I am, if I can get my scripts written quickly. But I try to pre-plan these stories the day before, just because that way I already kind of have an idea of where I want the story to go. I already know the elements that I'm going to tell, but it doesn't always work out that way. Sometimes there's breaking news in the morning, whether it be a water main break, a fire, it could be anything really. And then I have to drop what I'm doing, forget all the scripts that I wrote, and go book it to that breaking news scene. So got to be very adaptable, very on your feet. From there, after the show's in, so my last live hit is at 7:30. From there, I go back to the station, figure out, okay, do my managers have me going out to cover an event for the rest of my shift, which ends at noon, or am I starting to pre-plan for the next day? It really just depends, honestly, who's on the clock for that day and how many staff members we have coming in, because there may be a lot of events that are happening when I leave after 12. So then that falls on the day side and the night side crews. Whereas there might be a ton of events in the morning. So then me and my photographer, because I am an MMJ, we split up and we go and cover as many events as we can so that we can get it in our noon shows as well as day side and night side. So no day looks the same. It's very fluid and ever changing. And honestly, I've done every single shift since being up here in New York, since being at 6, and I prefer the mornings just because I'm very bubbly. I have a very light heart. And so just waking up and starting people's day and telling them what they can expect when they walk out the door, what's in store for the day. That's just the biggest blessing for me.
Well, bless you indeed. Having doing that shift before years ago, I know it's challenging. So good work.
At the coffee.
There you go. That's a requirement. Karen, thank you so much for joining us. We know you had some
Sure.
technical issues. That comes with the territory with this
It
format.
does.
But it's great to have you. Your probably day is a little bit different. You're at the Capitol most days. Kind of walk us through your routine.
Right. Yes. I think I'm the opposite of Lynsey because I did the morning shift many, many years ago. And I'm like the grumpiest person in the morning. I only start going as the day starts rolling on, midday, early afternoon, which is perfect because my deadline is late afternoon. So I didn't get to hear everybody's typical day, but I realized that yesterday was a typical day for me with all its, kind of warts and flaws. What's going on at the Capitol is the governor's essentially lost control of her message on bail reform, and there's all kinds of tensions with the legislature. So usually when I start the day, I'll start like 7:30, 8 o'clock, and probably email a lot of the PR people who are listening, say, hey, I'm interested in such and such. Hey, let's do that at 1 o'clock. And you'll probably see as my day unfolds why, I'll be, emailing you back at 12:30. Can we put that off, or let's do that tomorrow or something? So the governor put out her schedule. She was going to speak at the state troopers at 12:30. But for some reason, the media had to be there at 11. And so some of my other PBS and NPR affiliate colleagues were saying, no, there's a lot of rallies. We don't want to go to that. And I said, all right, I'll tell you what, I'll go because this governor's been avoiding questions and somebody has to check it out. So I'm like, so we're going to have a trade later where they would give me the audio from the rallies. So I get there, of course, because that's me. I talk my way in, even though they're very strict with the timing. I happen to go in with a bunch of irate relatives who are also late and not let in. So I get there and the governor's not even there. I'm told that she's going to be there later, which was kind of surprising given, usually the governors sit up on the podium during the whole graduation ceremony. And they said, oh, she's just going to speak from a podium and she's going to leave, no questions. So I'm like, fine, I'm out of here. So I left, and then of course you have to just scramble to plan your day. I get up to my office at the Capitol. It turns out both legislative leaders, they want to have a say in this bail reform controversy. So they're coming to us and holding media availabilities. So, the plan changes. It's going to be based on what the leaders are saying, their pushback. And then finally, I have story that's coming together. Luckily, this is early afternoon, often it's later than that. And so I'm going with that. I did make it to one of the rallies, even ran outside, ran back. So it's just, I guess what I'm trying to say is it's hard to plan, especially when, something is a session day and there's some kind of brewing thing going on at the Capitol. You're kind of ricocheting off developments and also trying to, steer a narrative so that the public knows what's going on. And then, I'm filing these days by 4 or 5 o'clock. Before the pandemic, it'd be like 6 or 7, and that was long, but we usually can get it done by 4 or 5 o'clock. So that's a typical day, and any other feelers I might have had out for other stories I wanted to generate are they're gone for another day. And I'm scrambling with the PR people, asking them to set up things for me because we don't see people in the way we used to. So a lot of it is through email and Zoom.
Well, I'll just stay with you, Karen, for the next question. When it comes, because you are juggling so many different stories and being at the Capitol, it's all of what's happening in the moment. How do you decide what you're going to cover and what makes for a good story?
Well, for me, it has to be audio driven. For instance, this governor happens to have a lot of questionable fundraising issues, and I really enjoy reading Casey's paper and learning all about that. But like a story about, this donor and that donor, it's not going to work for me unless I find an easy way in to tell it. So it has to be by events. By now, I know which people to interview that will, be able to condense something into an interesting soundbite so that we can, tell the story in the time that we have. So I think it's driven by events, which, has been a struggle in some of the months of the pandemic. But how can you tell the story through audio? Who's your character to build it off of? And so that's that's partly the way. And then also I'm trying to cover the issues for, right now it's the budget. Are they going to do a gas tax holiday? So you want to keep that in the back of your mind. Are they going to spend more money on home care, child care? So I just have a whole list of different issues, and I'm always like trying to check back in on them and, see how those stories are developing and whether it's time to file on them.
Thanks. Lynsey, for you, you're obviously catering to the morning crowd. How do you determine what stories you're going to cover that maybe appeals to a slightly different demographic than, say, the late news?
So I'm always looking for a story that is relatable, something that someone can look at, read, or hear and be like, hey, I can relate to that. It doesn't always work that way, because unfortunately, this is, I think, the downside and kind of being a reporter is at the end of the day, what I think is a good story may not be a good story to my manager. And at the end of the day, they have the final say on, what goes on air, how it goes on air. So for me, I'm constantly looking through social media, whether it be kind of what's happening here in the Capital Region pages, those type of groups, school districts, a lot of it lately, with that rise in violence that we've seen throughout the schools. Those are the kind of stories that, parents, when they wake up in the morning and they turn on the news, they want to know what their superintendent or principal is saying about what's going on as they're getting ready to send their child off to school. I try to keep my stories light because I don't know about anyone else, but I personally don't want anything too heavy as I'm getting ready to start my day and trying to have a positive outlook on the day ahead. But like I said, it really does come down to the manager's discretion and what's really going to start turning the gears for people that day, as well as on our social media platforms and web analytics and things of that nature.
Great. So, Giuliana, you talked about your morning meetings. What are some of those discussions that your newsroom is having about what to cover and why to cover it, and the kind of stories you're looking for?
I think that one of the first things we do after we kind of go around the horn and everyone, rattles off a couple of different possibilities for the day. And then the conversation becomes, okay, what's the lead? Sometimes the lead is very obvious that day. There's something happening in court that we've known about and that someone's already assigned to, and there's the lead, and then we're just filling in the gaps. But there are a lot of days where we are trying to decide what's the most leadable story. And for us, kind of like Karen was saying, things are very audio driven. We're very video driven. We need something visual. A story can have impact, it could have politics, it could have, all this kind of stuff. But if you don't have video for it and you're using file video, it's not as much of a leadable story. So we have those conversations about what a lead is. And a lot of days, I personally, I can't speak for my colleagues, but my goal when I go into each day is to be the one to snag that lead for that day. And I want to grab that. And a lot of times it's not coming from press releases. It's not coming from, scheduled events. We want to enterprise something that either no one else is going to have, no one else is thinking of. It's so unique and so specific and so impactful that it speaks for itself, and there's our lead. And so a lot of times it's finding something niche that's not right out in front of you, which can be a challenge, because then you're looking through your emails and you're like, well, here are all these events, these things that it's a one-stop shop. But a lot of times that just can't be the lead for the day. I've recently taken over the weekend morning anchor position, where I have been able to utilize a lot more of these lighter, event type feature things where I can, set up Zoom interviews and air them during the weekend morning shows, because like Lynsey was saying, you try to keep it lighter in the morning. So I have been able to get accustomed to that kind of storytelling as well. But for me, a lot of times it's about trying to figure out what isn't there, what's not in my emails, what's not online that I'm going to try to put together.
All right, thank you. Casey, obviously as editor, you have some say in what goes on the front page of your paper and in your paper. Talk a little bit about your decision making. And I am curious, earlier you talked about one of the first things that you do is look at social media metrics and web metrics. How much does what the audience is interested in online come into play in your decision making?
The answer is sometimes a lot and sometimes not a lot at all. A story that will do fantastically well online is not necessarily a story that we'll put on the front page. You know, arrests in very dramatic crimes, you know, horrible two-car fatals. Those are the types of stories that can do very, very well online, but you know, they're just going to be on the inside of the cap region section, which is in no way to say that these stories aren't tragic or or important or compelling in any way. It's just that they you know, a two-car fatal is probably not going to be a front page story as horrible as it is. You know, anything can make its way onto the front page, whether it's because of the news or because of the skill of the storytelling or the quality of the writing. Certainly what we're aiming for is stories that have impact, whether they have a kind of policy impact in terms of sort of bringing wrongdoing or abuses of power to light. You know, I think that's kind of that's very much our brand, especially with our investigative journalism. We are a lot less kind of, we don't suffer from the need to, not suffer, I shouldn't put it that way, but we're not as required to, you know, to find good audio, to find good video that, you know, in radio and TV, as Karen noted, sometimes that's something that you definitely want to try for. We can let stories run long, you know, and just in the past couple of weeks, we've run some very, very long stories, up to 3,500, 4,000 words as part of our horse racing series, Horse Racing Unbridled. That's a real advantage. But, you know, ultimately the story that you're trying to tell, whether it's short or long, is a story that will make people say, you got to be kidding me. You know, those are the types of stories when we are discussing them just as budget lines in either the morning or the afternoon meeting. If somebody groans and goes, no, come on, you know, that quite likely is a story that's going to make its way out on the front page, you know, but that is very, very hard to do when you're talking about some very important subjects, such as public corruption. You know, I mean, if you did a shot every time you saw a Jacob story in the Times-Union, you would, you know, you'd keel over dead probably. And things like redistricting that are very, very important, but very, very difficult to tell in a way that's compelling, that's easily, you know, comprehensible to the public. So those are the types of stories when you can tell an important story about public corruption and its enforcement or the lack thereof, or a big political, highly technical issue like redistricting. If you can tell those well and tell them compellingly and explain to people why they matter in their lives, that's really the sweet spot.
Well, this has all been really interesting. I think it helps us, you know, figure out what are good stories that all of you could use that maybe, you know, our organizations, our members, or whoever it may be can know about. So I kind of want to get into a little bit of that relationship between a journalist and a public relations professional, and to explore how, you know, we can best help each other and provide you what you need. And Giuliana, I'll start with you. You know, your day is fairly condensed in terms of your news gathering. You have, you know, 3 to 4 hours of really when you need to get those interviews. You know, what's a good time to reach out to you, and what's the best way to communicate with you about a story or to pitch a story?
I think that the best time to reach out to me would be between 8 a.m. and 9:30 a.m. because if it's any earlier than that, if it's the night before, I might not scroll back that far in my email. There are just so many. There are so many emails from, like, God, you wouldn't even believe, like, how did these people get my email address? And they're emailing me about National Open and Umbrella Inside Day. And I'm like, okay, like, what's going on? So it's sometimes hard to separate those important emails from everything else that gets sent to us. So that period of time in the morning is perfect because it'll be the most recent stuff in my inbox. It'll appear urgent, happening today, you know, especially if the subject line says happening today at 10 a.m. That's what I want to know immediately, because it's all about timing and timely and what's impactful that day. I would say the best mode of communication is email. There are certain, I would say like people who represent the mayor, people who represent other elected officials will often use text message as a way to send something a little more informal, like a heads up about something or, something like that. But for an event, for, a one-stop shop story idea, we want it all there, the when, where, how, all that kind of stuff. Phone calls can be nice sometimes, but sometimes I'm just super annoyed because I'm in the middle of making my own calls and setting things up and I can't fully listen to this. So email is definitely the best. I appreciate always when you're given the heads up like 3 or 4 days before, and then you also get that follow-up day of email in case it didn't make it into the planner or that sort of thing. But I would say email, unless like a text message, maybe when it's, oh my gosh, this thing is happening right now, you need to know about it immediately. And I always have my work cell in my email signature, and it's there because I want people to utilize it. But not for just, hey, did you see my email? That's not always the most effective way, because I probably did see it, but something else was happening that day. So yeah, email is king.
How about you, Karen? Is email king for you?
Yes, everything Giuliana said. Pretty much. Yeah, and I have that same problem. A lot of people still think that 9 to 9:30 is a good time to email about an event, which, I don't blame them for thinking that. But a lot of times I'm not even online then, because like I said, I do stuff early, but my day doesn't start till later. And okay, so if I don't look at the work email where people who don't know me as well will email me, it's down to the bottom. I don't even see it. And yeah, I don't know, I swear people have sold my name to a number of companies, get the most bizarre, PR, requests for just bizarre interviews that I would never do. But also I agree, the emails, like 7:30, 8:30 in the morning, especially if it's something day of, like, then I'm going to see it, I'm going to remember. And also pre-pandemic, which was very helpful because there are a lot of PR and lobbyists who, just focus on the Capitol, like come to my office and say, hey, remember we were emailing about such and such? And I'll say, oh yeah, I do want to do that. I haven't had time. Let's set up something now. Or do you have somebody now that I can talk to? Often what was helpful if we reporters couldn't make events is the PR person would bring the principals around afterward. And then, I always have time for that. I mean, there's really no excuse that I can't whip out my microphone and talk to somebody for 5 minutes. So that's a helpful way in person. I know that's not as realistic these days, but that certainly, I think, helped everybody because it's just a lot less effort from face to face.
Any time to make it easier on everybody is a good way of doing it. So yeah, that's a good
Exactly.
tip. Casey, how about you? Like, a lot of your reporters, what do they prefer and what do you prefer in terms of outreach and timing?
Maybe I'm just trying to save myself from emails, and this will come off as impossibly self-important, but I'm like, don't email me first, go to the subject reporter, right? Or the kind of topic editor. In other words, if you represent a band who's coming to play at SPAC, don't email me, email the features editor or our music writers. Yeah, I mean, email, I get like everybody on this call, I just get a crazy amount of email, but it does tend to be, when it's well-timed, the best way to reach out to me. I don't want your texts, nor do I probably want a phone call. But no, email is still the best mode of communication. But yeah, the most important thing is knowing who to send it to and knowing how to pitch it in a compelling way, without a doubt. You can write a completely fantastic 3-paragraph email pitch, or you can write a horribly boring one, on a subject that's really compelling. So it's all in the execution and the timing, and of course in the personal relationship between the reporter and the PR person or communications professional who's kind of pitching the story.
Yeah, relationships are key. I think that's something that we all know and value, and is really, it is invaluable to storytelling and to having that trust involved in talking to each other and trusting each other and having those conversations. Lynsey, I'll head over to you. What's the best way to reach out to you, and what do you prefer in terms of timing?
Like everyone else, email is definitely the best. You could send me or you can call me, you can text me. I'll definitely get back to you. But for me, it's just easier to have all the information for me that I can read out right there instead of trying to remember kind of what we said over the phone, because like Giuliana had mentioned earlier, 10 times out of 10, probably doing something else. So I can't, be talking while also trying to finish up, sending off another email to someone or editing a piece that's supposed to air at noon. So email is definitely best. And also too, with email, put as much information as you possibly can about what you are looking for us to come out and cover. Tell me time, place, when, where, when, what kind of visuals are going to be available for me to shoot. When's the best time to speak with someone? Let's say you're trying to promote an event that's happening next Tuesday and today's Thursday. Let me know in advance when's the best time so I can get back to you immediately to lock that in and set up an interview for X amount of time. Email, and for the timing, I would say also as well in the morning. I know that might be kind of hard maybe sometimes if you're not already up or you're trying to get your day started and get to the office, get breakfast, assess how your day is supposed to go out. One thing I recently discovered, I have the Microsoft Outlook email and you can send things later, so you can pre-schedule a time for things to send. And that has been very helpful for me just in communicating with members in my station, because I know it might be something that may get lost in that email throughout the day. And let's say I need them to know this an hour before our 5 o'clock newscast. So I'll send it or pre-send it for 4 o'clock, and then it'll come through at 4 and it's right fresh at the top of everyone's feed. So if you don't have Microsoft, I highly encourage you to go find that button where you can pre-send something out.
Very good. Well, I'll stick with you, Lynsey, for the next one. The last question talked about what do you like in terms of timing and communication, but what annoys you when it comes to pitches or working with PR folks, that we can avoid, pitfalls to stay away from? Is there just something that it just doesn't work for you?
Well, when it comes to a pitch, for me, nothing will ever annoy me. You're sending it for a reason. People are talking about it. You're trying to get the word out about it. Someone in this world is going to resonate with what you're trying to get me to come out and cover. So no pitch is stupid. That's first and foremost. I think when it comes down to what annoys me with spokespersons, and I don't even want to call it an annoyance. It's just, I just want the relationship that we develop and that we have and trying to build on. I want it to be as honest and straightforward as possible. For me, when I used to work dayside, it would, you spend all day going back and forth with someone, you think you have something, and then by the time it's time for me to go live and present the report, I have to end it with, we reached out and we haven't received a response back at this time. I would have much rather, because I feel like that paints PR people to look rude and standoffish. And I think it sends the wrong message to the viewers, when in all actuality, something may have come up in your day, or the person that you were trying to put me in contact with to interview, got called to a last minute meeting or a family emergency. Things happen in this world. And so if you can just be as straightforward and honest with me, hey, that won't happen today. I can tell you this. I can get you those numbers tomorrow. That's something for me to take back to my managers, who ultimately at the end of the day decide what goes on air. And we can say, oh yeah, we did reach out to so-and-so. So-and-so said that, this person was unavailable, but they did tell me this. Then that leaves it up, I feel, for my viewers to be okay, they are responding, they are working to get them that answer. They're not just blowing them off.
Absolutely. Giuliana, how about you? Is there some do's and don'ts there that in terms of dealing with PR folks that you like or don't like?
I would agree with Lynsey that there's nothing wrong with, like, an email itself isn't going to set me off. It's not going to, oh, I'm never going to work with this person ever. I would say that the biggest thing for me is when a story has more than one side to it. And obviously the person presenting it to me in their pitch takes a certain position on it. Their organization takes a certain position on it. And the way they talk about it insinuates that the story that I'm going to do with it is going to be entirely that position. It's going to entirely represent that one side of it. When meanwhile, on the other end of the computer, I'm emailing the person who opposes the thing or a person who this thing is impacting, and I'm going to incorporate that into the story because, I feel it's my responsibility to do so, or I feel it'll be more well-rounded, or it'll reach more audiences. And I always hope that the person who sent me the pitch, that the person who is advocating for one side over the other understands that that is part of it. And sometimes I worry, I'm like, oh my gosh, I hope I didn't, mess up that relationship by showing the other side, by showing an opposing viewpoint. But that hasn't really happened, but it's always something that I think about, like, I wonder if this person knows that I am going to, and sometimes if I feel like it's relevant, and I'll tell them what the other side is saying, and then try to get their response to that, so that it's fair, so that everyone feels like they're in the loop about what I'm doing with the story. But I think that sometimes the kind of assumption from the other side that I'm doing them a favor by doing this story, when I'm actually utilizing the resources and the tools that they're giving me to make it a well-rounded piece for our viewers, and not for this organization, and not for this person who's reached out to me. So like, the ideas themselves are never annoying, or never, they're always well written and well presented, but I am going to do my part to include another viewpoint. And I always hope that that's, something that's understood and expected from time to time.
I would hope that no person on my side of the table would ever be offended by a fair story. So point well taken. Casey, you've worked with a lot of PR folks over the years, and spokespeople. What is most helpful to you, and what is something that you're like, just try not to do, or it does bother you?
I'll answer the second part first.
Sure.
Major turnoff is opening an email with, "This is strictly embargoed until X time." I think we've probably all gotten those. And unless you're like a polling agency or institution that we have like sort of a standing understanding with, that, yeah, fine, if you send us the Siena poll the night before, we will agree to your standard 5:30 a.m., no posting till then arrangement. But I still get just an incredible number of statements that say, "This is strictly embargoed until 10 a.m. tomorrow." I'm like, dude, we don't have any kind of agreement on this. You just sent it to me. It's out. I actually once got an email, this was a couple of years ago when I was down at the Capitol, from an activist group who said, "We will be unveiling a banner on sort of, the wall of, the Empire State Plaza that everybody could see as they would drive up the arterial. Please do not report this, as we believe law enforcement would take issue with it." I'm like, you're putting out a press release admitting that you're going to do something that is probably going to be, disorderly conduct, or, who knows what. No, don't do that. You've got to, if you want to tell us that you're going to do it, call ahead of time, and, potentially we will reach an arrangement in terms of either confidentiality or some kind of embargo time. But don't send me something and say, "This is embargoed." It's like sending me something and saying, "This is off the record." It's like, no, dude, you just sent it to me. Anything you send to a newspaper is fair game. So that's what I hate. But no, the best PR folks that I've worked with, and I've worked with a number of them down through the years, and many of them, Steve, like yourself, have a background in journalism, more than a background, but real experience in journalism. The best ones understand all the things that we've been discussing this morning, the structure of the day, the realities in terms of resource allocation and the time it takes to get a reporter on scene, whether it's somebody with a microphone or a camera or just a notebook. And yeah, I mean, most people who build careers in public relations, and if they interact with the media a lot, and they understand those kind of basic ground rules and what makes a good story. And it is true. There are a lot of elements of journalism that we could do without people in communications and public relations, but a lot of it, we are very dependent upon them as either the point of contact when we're initiating a story, or as the folks who are actually pitching us stories and bringing things to our attention. Everybody's got eyes and ears, and the best PR folks are looking for that good narrative that they think the public ought to know about.
Very good. Karen, I'll turn it over to you. Before I do, if any folks have any questions, please put them in the chat box, and or unmute yourselves in just a minute. But Karen, I'll wrap that question up with you in terms of the relationships with PR folks.
Okay, I would just say one thing that annoys me, and this usually is people who are not experienced and just starting out, is trying to force a commitment from a reporter to go to something, because then, just being a reporter perversely, then I don't want to go. But it's like, we really can't commit, so people will be like, are you going to come to this? Are you going to come to this? I'm like, I don't know. I'll try, and be flexible with us, because our days are, they change. What we're going to report on changes on an hourly basis sometimes. And also, a word of advice, one good way to shut down a bad story about the group that you represent is provide some kind of answer. I'm sure a lot of you saw the video of our Lieutenant Governor, Brian Benjamin, running away and jumping into an elevator. That does not help you. Even if your answer, is frankly, I don't know how to use another word for this, BS, and just doesn't say anything, we have to put it in. So that's like a little tip. And that it may not change the tenor of the story, but it shows that you're a participant in it. Or you could, I wouldn't advise this, you could take, Governor Andrew Cuomo, the former governor's spokesman's advice, and just attack everybody. That actually is not the way to do it, but say something, address it somehow. And I think even though it's painful and you don't want to, I think in the end, your group benefits from that.
Great advice, Karen. We're coming up, probably about 10, 15 minutes left. We have a couple of questions coming in. So not to pressure you to have tight sound bites, but we'll try and get through as many of these questions as we can. Darcy, good question. Love to hear about off the record and on background. And I'll kind of just open this up, to anyone who may want to address that. How do you think about those terms and what qualifies as off the record? Giuliana.
Well, I was actually going to make a point about on background, and I feel almost like when someone will send me something and then have on background in a bunch of bullet points, they never include the conditions as under which this stuff is on background. So then I typically just report it because I don't outwardly attribute it to the person who sent it to me. But it's always confusing, because when you say on background, you're usually agreeing to some kind of terms. And that doesn't always happen. It almost is like when oftentimes when someone sends on background things, it's almost like they're saying here's what's really going on, but you didn't hear it from me. Well, then who did I hear it from? Because I never just publish something without attributing it to the person who told me. I don't just come up with knowledge. So that's always a little bit frustrating. I think off the record is what it is. It kind of speaks for itself, but on background is such a gray area that I think we don't have enough discourse about, enough conversation. And then once it's sent to me, that's usually the last time I hear from the person that day. They send me all the information, I'll send a follow-up, and then I don't hear back. So it kind of leaves me with, some uncertainty.
Sure. Karen.
I hate on background. because I can't use it. What am I supposed to do on the radio? Just like say it and not say where it came from. So usually I'll try to get the person who sent it to say, okay, can I just say that you said this or it comes from your group? And also off the record is problematic. I was actually waiting for Casey to say something about that because I know he's had a lot of experience with that. We had a lot of that with the former Cuomo administration, and they just abuse that so much, the off the record, that after a while you don't want to talk to them in that way because it becomes useless at a certain point. I mean, off the record should be reserved for something really, really sensitive. Maybe you're a whistleblower and you need to get something out, but you're in personal jeopardy. I mean, I think that gets abused a lot.
Yeah, I was just going to say, if it's really imperative for both, the PR professional and for the journalist, before the information is proffered, to say, look, this is going to be off the record, and strictly define what that means. For some people, off the record, it's like, you didn't hear it from me, but you can use this information for purposes of other reporting. In other words, I'm going to tell you something off the record. You can then use the facts that I've given you, and you can confirm it or attempt to confirm it with other people. Some people, when they say off the record, you can't use this. And that's different. And that's also very frustrating because usually that is something very juicy that we want to report. But I agree, like on background is completely squishy, and a lot of time it's just a crutch that is used by PR people, usually at public entities, state agencies, or local municipalities, who they want to put the information out there, but they don't want to be directly quoted. And that's another thing that really sticks in my craw, is people who, you'll do a 20-minute interview with a spokesperson for an agency, and then they'll say, okay, and just attribute that to a spokesperson. And I'm like, no, you're paid to do this. This is your job. I'm going to quote you. And that's very frustrating. But it is really important to define these terms, because they can be so squishy. And it's, and three fair-minded individuals, whether they're journalists or PR people, can have three completely different definitions of what on background means.
Lynsey, this next question I'll direct to you. Zoom, that's become very popular, obviously, during the pandemic. Obviously something for television news to use. Is this something that's going to stick around even after the pandemic subsides, or do you, just to make it easier on everybody, or do you feel like you're going to get back to more of traditional interviews?
I think so. And I mean, I often think about it too. Why weren't we doing this before? Because it really is so convenient for, I won't say myself as the reporter, but I think it's more convenient for my interviewee. They can do it on their cell phone. They can do it at their office. They don't have to worry about the pressure of a camera per se, like the physical camera in their face and choking up on words and things of that nature. So I do think that it's going to stick around. It's definitely made my job as a reporter much easier as well. I like to say phoner is like my last resort. I always aim for in-person just because it's more personable. I value that face-to-face communication, like in person, more than I would the Zoom. But Zoom is like, it really does open up a lot of doors. And I find that a lot of people are more willing to do Zoom interviews than an in-person interview.
Good point. Another question from Cassidy. Talking about social media. Is social media component a requirement now for storytelling and story selection? I don't know, Giuliana, maybe if you have a thought on that, or Karen.
So yeah, I would say pretty much. I mean, all of our stations now have a digital editor, and they're very much looking at those metrics and what to put out. And I mean, I was never told to get a Twitter account. I wanted one. I mean, maybe now you want to. And I love that. It's like a different way of getting stories across. You can be a little snarkier, which is fun. You can be a little more playful. And Yeah, I think definitely. I don't find Facebook personally that much of a good news thing. If I post like some news story I'm proud of on Facebook, like my friends don't even look at it. So but yeah, I think definitely, yeah, because that's certainly where I get my first news is from Twitter. So you gotta be out there. Absolutely.
Anyone else on that one? So another question, story pitching. Does it help to pitch to the assignment editor as well as the reporter? This is from Diane. Yeah, Giuliana.
So yes, you should always be sending it also to our assignment editor, because if I already have something going on that day, our assignment editor has a grid in front of him with all of our names, our photographers' names, the timing of events, and he'll just drag and drop events into people's grids. And our assignment editor will also, if he gets in much earlier than I do, he will make the calls to set the thing up for me by the time I get in, if there's already a managerial decision that that's what I'm doing that day and I'm not pitching today, they've assigned me something, this is what they want me to do. So I feel the more eyes you can get on it, the better. At the same time, when I receive a pitch, I like to feel like for some reason it was pitched to me specifically because I've seen your coverage on XYZ, or here's a link to a story that you did on this, and today we have a potential follow-up for that. I like when those pitches are personalized like that, but there's also no harm in sending it to our general mailbox forward so that if I can't do it, someone else can.
Casey, this question is directed to you. How has the news hole changed with Ukraine coverage? And what suggestions do you have for getting stories to be heard when there is so much going on, maybe even outside of the capital region?
Well, I mean, in terms of news holes, certainly, as we were discussing before, that Ukraine coverage has taken up so much of the international and national pages that we have, and on days when the paper tends to be tighter, and that's usually Monday, Tuesday, that making sure that we're including a comprehensive national and international report can sometimes be difficult. That's just a factor of the print product. Of course, we have considerably more space online, but our reporters, the Times Union's reporters, they, thank God for their safety, they're not in Ukraine. They're still back here, and they're still looking for and reporting on stories that matter to, I don't want to say that matter to local readers, because of course everything that's going on in Ukraine matters to local readers as it does to everybody else, but stories that concern local topics and local stories and local subjects. And a lot of that is the impact of the situation in Ukraine. That's a local story in terms of fuel prices, in terms of supply lines already, stretched by the pandemic, and certainly in terms of the significant Ukrainian community here in the capital region and across New York. It is, I think, along with the Omicron variant, rising up in January and February, the local and regional and statewide impacts of the war in Ukraine will be, is definitely going to be one of the top stories of the year, if not the top story of the year, depending upon how it goes, which is still very much up in the air. And I'm sorry, what was the second question?
On getting your stories heard. I think you.
Yeah, we kind of touched on that, but just to go back to the question of should you reach out to the assigning editor as well as the reporter, I agree that you should do both, but you should do it at the same time. In other words, don't reach out to the reporter, and then if you don't hear back from the reporter, don't go to the parent, as it were. You want to, so if you're pitching a health story, pitch Bethany Bump and pitch Susan Mahalik, our managing editor for news, and just copy them at the same time. Hey, here's something you might be interested. I'll be happy to talk to either of you about this. I'm sure you're very busy, but here's a potentially good story for you.
Well, we are at the 9:30 mark, and I hate to keep everybody. I'm gonna do one last question, but we'll make it super quick. I think it's an easy one to answer from Kelly, asking PR folks are told to keep pitches to 1 to 2 paragraphs in emails. Would you prefer a longer email with quotes, or do you want to just say, hey, this is the story idea, call me if you're interested? Karen, what do you think about that?
Yes, 1 to 2 paragraphs. That's still good. Any longer, we're not going to read it, and clearly put time and day. I'm much better at this now, but during the height of the pandemic, I was constantly getting mixed up what day and what time it was, but that's still, just make that clear, make it short, and then we can always follow up later with details.
All right. Anything else you just really want to add, all of you? You know, something we need to know or important to know? All right. Well, this has been a great conversation. I apologize we couldn't get to everybody's questions, but I think it was a lot of fun, and we all learned a lot. So, you know, you all do a wonderful job every day. We depend on you. We value what you do. So thank you very much for being a part of this today. And, you know, hopefully we will be doing it again. I just want to remind folks of a couple of events coming up. On April 8th, PRSA is holding a webinar about the APR, the accreditation of public relations. It's a great process. I myself, a bunch of us on the call that have gone through it to improve our skills, our ethics, our understanding of PR. So you can go to our Region PRSA website for more information. And there's going to be our Northeastern District Conference coming up on June 17th, which will be a great opportunity for workshops, networking opportunities. It will be held at the Capitol Center in Albany. So please go online and look for that information. And stay tuned. We're gonna have a speed pitching event, which is always fun. We're gonna have some mixers coming up. So things are starting to happen again this year as we roll out of the pandemic. So we hope to see all of you. If you're not a member, please join PRSA. It's a really great organization with a lot of great resources and great networking opportunities. So everybody have a wonderful day, and we hope to see you soon.